from what was then called the New Edition Revised and Enlarged Encyclopedia of Freemasonry and Kindred Sciences, comprising the whole range of the arts, sciences, and literature of the Masonic Institution by Albert G. Mackey, 33rd degree, Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite, Supreme Council, Southern Jurisdiction, United States of America, author of the History of Freemasonry, Lexicon of Freemasonry, Textbook of Masonic Jurisprudence, Symbolism of Freemasonry, etc., etc., etc. Revised and enlarged by Robert I. Clegg, 33rd degree. Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite, Supreme Council, Northern Masonic Jurisdiction, United States of America. Editor-in-Chief, the Masonic History Company, active and honorary member of Masonic bodies conferring all regular degrees in the United States and Europe, corresponding member of Masonic Research Associations in the United States, England, Ireland, France, Germany, Switzerland, and Belgium, an official reviser of various authorized standard works on the history, jurisprudence, and symbolism of the Masonic Institution. This elaborate revision has had the active direction and able cooperation of many Masonic scholars of the world, including William J. Hugan, 32nd degree, Ancient and Accepted Rite, Supreme Council of England, Past Grand Deacon, England, Past Grand Warden, Egypt, Past Grand Warden, Iowa, Past Assistant Grand Sojourner, England, Founder, Member, Quator, Coronati Lodge, London, author of English Masonic Rite, Old Charges, etc., and Edward I. Hawkins, 30th degree, Ancient and Accepted Rite, Supreme Council of England, Provincial Senior Grand Warden, Sussex, Past Provincial Senior Grand Warden, Oxfordshire, Member, Quator, Coronati Lodge, London, author of the Concise Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, profusely illustrated, Volume 2, published by the Masonic History Company, Chicago, Toronto, New York, London. Let no Freemason say that I quote from dishonorable or unrepresentative sources of the Freemasonic lodges of the world. Save your lies for those who do not know better. This was published in 1929. How can they do what they do? Simple. On page 1089, under War, Freemasonry in War, the question how Freemasons should conduct themselves in time of war when their own country is one of the belligerents is an important one. Of the political course of a Freemason in his individual and private capacity, there is no doubt. The charges declare that he must be a peaceable subject to the civil powers and never be concerned in plots and conspiracies against the peace and welfare of the nation. And they must say that, and then they tell the truth. But so anxious is the order to be unembarrassed by all political influences, but so anxious is the order to be unembarrassed by all political influences that treason, however discountenanced by the craft, is not held as a crime, is not held as a crime. They cannot expel him from the lodge, and his relation to it remains indefeasible. End quote. Freemasons are not revolutionaries. Page 894. Page 894. During the whole of the 19th century, Russian Freemasonry, if not dormant, was at least hidden and entirely negligible. The revival of interest in spiritual matters, which coincided with the beginning of the 20th century, brought about a revival of interest in Freemasonry. A few prominent Russian intellectuals joined French lodges. Professor Yunjonov joined at Paris the Scottish Rite Lodge Les Amis Réunis. Paul Jablokov, world-famous electrician, founded the lodge Commos under the ancient accepted Scottish rite at Paris, where in 1906 about 15 Russian publicans joined French lodges. These brethren, on their return to Russia, organized two lodges, one in St. Petersburg, the Polar Star, and a lodge at Moscow. These lodges were instituted with great ceremony in May 1908 by two representatives of the Grand Orient of France, and up to 1909, 6 lodges were organized. There was an interval in their activity over police restrictions, and then these lodges were reopened in 1911, working under the Grand Orient of France with practically no ritual and having an avowedly political aim in view, that of the overthrow of autocracy. There was what was known as a Supreme Council, an exclusively administrative body whose members were elected for 3 years. This organization had no regularity and enjoyed no recognition abroad. In 1913 and 1914, the organization nevertheless had about 42 lodges, chiefly composed of members of the Cadet Party. The first revolution in March 1917 is said to have been inspired and operated from these lodges, and all the members of Kerensky's government belonged to them. After the Bolshevik Revolution, most members of these lodges immigrated, and after a long inactivity, they were successful in forming under the auspices of the Grand Orient of France, a now Polar Star Lodge at Paris. 4 other lodges working in Russia have been organized under the Grand Lodge of France, and there is also a Lodge of Perfection and a Rose Cross chapter working in Russia at Paris, the rituals of the ancient and accepted Scottish rite under the Supreme Council. The volume of the sacred law is always on the altar at the meetings of these 4 lodges, and the work is said to be usually a study of the deeper meanings of Freemasonry. The 4 craft lodges work with a committee which in fact represents what the brethren believe to be the future Grand Lodge of Russia. The Supreme Council has sanctioned a temporary committee in the higher degrees which represents the nucleus of the future Supreme Council for Russia of the ancient and accepted Scottish rite. On February 10, 1927, a Russian consistory called Russia was formed. That, ladies and gentlemen, comes directly out of their own writings. And there's much, much more. But as always, I want to encourage you to look. I don't want to give you everything, always everything, because if I try to give you everything, it becomes unbelievable. So as always, you must question, and you must search, and you must verify, and when you do, you learn the truth. And the walls are not put up, and the truth is not so easily rejected or dismissed. The curtains do not hide what can be found by anyone. Remember, he who seeks shall find. There can be no thought of finishing, for aiming at the stars, both literally and figuratively, is the work of generations. But no matter how much progress one makes, there is always the thrill of just beginning. Robert H. Goddard, the father of rocketry, said that to H.G. Wells, April 20th, 1932. Shortly after that, H.G. Wells began work upon his book entitled The New World Order. Also, in 1938, his cousin Orson tested the theorem that an invasion of some other species from some other planet could bring the world together in one government and dissolve national boundaries and do away with wars forever. Arnold Toynbee, another great proponent of world government, said, "Civilization is a movement and not a condition, a voyage and not a harbor." The aerospace game didn't really begin with the Wright brothers or the 1783 balloon. The history of space exploration, ladies and gentlemen, appropriately begins in the conscious realm with the legend of Icarus, the stories of Lucian of Samosata, and the notebooks of Leonardo da Vinci. But from a cultural point of view, the real game began with the interest and involvement of social organizations with the accumulation of hive energy. Language straight from the mysteries. Although the first institutional attempts to explore space may have been by someone like Jason and his Argonauts, the first institutionalized attempts to study Earth on a large scale came just before the aviation conventions of the early 1900s. It was called the International Polar Year and took place from August 1882 through August 1883. 11 countries participated in this first polar year. Their concern was the exploration of the virgin territory of both the Arctic and the Antarctic for the purpose of studying the magnetism, meteorology, auroras, and geology of the Earth. It's a hopeful place to begin this examination, for despite the continuing militarism of most countries, the polar year was a product of the desire for enlightenment and information, and used the social tactics of cooperation. It was an extraterritorial event with the planet as the parochial unit. It was a microcosm of the macrocosm of space exploration. Great changes were taking place on planet Earth at this time. The Western world was in the grips of the first industrial revolution, which essentially was the substitution of machines for human or animal labor. It was a great revolution, and it reached its peak in Europe and America between 1875 and 1910. And some say that it has peaked recently, and we have moved into the technological age. But it has yet to peak in many of the developing countries of the world. In some sense, of course, an industrial evolution had begun with the invention of stone tools, fire, the wheel, and the plow. But we have finally arrived at a point of significant revolutionary acceleration of the drive for discovery and invention in the social order. Every time you think I'm talking about space, I bring you back to the social order, for that's what it's really all about. In the third industrial revolution, an examination of the potential for a third new space-based industrial revolution, G. Harry Stein noted this: a revolution is a rapid and radical change in the way of doing things, of social organization, of lifestyle. Ring any bells for you? If industry is the sum total of human activities involved in the process of converting natural energy into social structure in accordance with Kuhn's hypothesis, then an industrial revolution is a drastic change in the work, operations, products, and manual mental output of human beings. End quote. The aerospace enterprise was born into just such a revolutionary environment, ladies and gentlemen. Economics, science, technology, and geopolitical interests were all beginning to assume global dimensions. It was the generation of the world wars. The social dimensions of the twilight struggle were being redefined in the direction of our modern version of the Cold War. It is not just idle curiosity to seek out the historical beginnings and organizational foundations of our current space enterprises and of our cultural genesis into the outer space environment. The growing pervasiveness of culture and collective consciousness is particularly apparent at the level of the socio-organism. The grand internal models discussed have discernible concrete external manifestations. One such manifestation is physical, the how-to level, the familiar terrestrial skills, the necessary acquisition of knowledge, and the establishment of organization. We need to understand the social and political nature and origins of humanity and its astronaut or cosmonaut envoys just as much as we need to understand their cosmic and evolutionary nature and origins. Therefore, we shall begin to examine these biosurvival and socio-transitional aspects of humanity's new yeoman efforts in space. What is it all about? Ralphie. Although national and ethnic identities remained dominant at the advent of the space age, global society had been forced into different forms of interaction, never before seen, cooperation and conflict, and thus into a growing necessity to recognize and accept the principles, aspirations, needs, and perspectives that are common to all people. There had already been a rapid growth of new international organizations, both public and private. There were private international professional organizations such as the International Council of Scientific Unions, or ICSU, and the International Astronautical Federation, IAF. The latter including most of the early rocket societies which were formed to promote human interplanetary travel. There were international religious institutions, university programs, corporations, and other arrangements, both in the public and the private sector. There was also, ladies and gentlemen, a growing number of official public organizations to which governments belonged, such as the International Telecommunications Union, ITU, and the World Meteorological Organization, WMO. A second International Polar Year was held, 50 years after the first, in 1932 and 1933. Scientists from 44 countries participated. 22 countries sent out field expeditions. The community of interests began to transcend geopolitical borders and even ethnic barriers. Most notable in this respect, of course, was the United Nations and its Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The groundwork was being laid for the conception of space as the common heritage of humankind, not nations, a keystone of all the space treaties that would follow the launching of Sputnik. Astronauts and cosmonauts would be designated envoys of mankind in the first instance, and of particular nation states only secondarily. So we're seeing a redefinition of parochial culture and nationalistic attitudes as a result of ecumenical forces, beyond the understanding of the average man or woman. We're seeing a reconsideration of the values that are essential to the universal priority of survival, and the resultant redefinitions are tending in the direction of social cooperation on a global scale. And I'm only discussing space. You see all of these international and global organizations that permeate every level of business, society, and religion constitute a great octopus with tentacles so intertwined around all of us that at this point the knot will not be untied. The tentacles will not be untwined. We will not set ourselves free from this in any normal, accepted manner. And if you don't believe this, hear me out. Information, imagination, and insight, the metaphysical, transcendental elements, are growing in importance with everyone, just for basic survival. They were already becoming more important by the time of Sputnik. In fact, if we look closely enough, we can see that the real resources of the space age are information. As I said, information is the power of the 90s. I believe you'll find that on the cover of my book. Enlightenment, intelligence, and higher consciousness, and I spoke of that in my book. Call it what you will. It is the simple interaction of the mind with different arrangements of matter, physical experience. Information is both the subject and the product. Nor is this simply the optimism that flows from an undisciplined accentuation of the positive, such as possibility thinking spouted from the altar of the crystal cathedral in the name of Jesus Christ, who would have torn it down. Rather, it is the empirical conclusion of late 20th century content analysis of widespread sources of local information, such as hometown newspapers. In Megatrends, John Naisbitt explains how content analysis arose within the military intelligence community during World War II and is still a preferred tool of the intelligence community. We use it here. Trends can be revealed by looking at continuities and discontinuities in the various sources of information, essentially the approach of computer intelligence, and that is what helps my projections be as accurate as they have been and will continue to be. Relative concerns can thus be examined empirically. Naisbitt's first contemporary megatrend reveals the second industrial revolution, a movement from an industrial society to an information society, characterized by Alvin Toffler, who I have recommended that you all read, as a third wave of global civilization, a society based on consciousness and intelligence. Of course, by Kuhn's strict definition of the word industry, which is the sum total of human activities involved in the process of converting natural energy into social structure, Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars, the first chapter in my book, information and industry are indistinguishable. That is why we have called this information revolution the second industrial revolution. By whatever name, of course, it is a physical, cultural, conscious process that is incapable of precise definition and has caused those who do not understand it to be confused and restless and threatened. Since the early 1950s, the pivotal period of final labor just preceding the birth of the space age, the percentage of the United States population in occupations in which the creation, processing, and distribution of information is the job has increased from 17 to well over 100. After the shock of Sputnik, there was an even stronger push toward an information-intensive society with the emphasis on public education and the explosive effect of the communications satellite and the computer. The birth of the second industrial revolution is closely related to the birth of the space age. The effects, ladies and gentlemen, of the information and the communications revolution on societies with freedom of information were truly staggering, to say the least. Communications satellites began to turn the world inward upon itself, thus transforming it into Marshall McLuhan's global village. And as we have seen, the revolutions, wars, and myriad other interactions, information exchanges of the modern era had already begun the process of global parochialism before satellites even arrived. We all came closer and closer together. Both the potential and the horrors of modern events and discoveries were affecting the social ideologies of humanity. Experience was driving humanity to search for survival in the direction of more conscious, transcending awareness.